This is Tuesday's Gemara of Samachay. We did the long Mishnah where we drew the contrast between the bird, the Chattas, and the bird, the Oila. The bird, the Oila, is done on the top part of the Mizbeach, the top half of the Mizbeach. The bird for the Chattas is done on the bottom half of the Mizbeach, which is precisely the opposite of what you do with the animals. By the animals, the Chattas is done on top of the Mizbeach, the top half, and sprinkling the blood and all that. And when the oilers are done on the bottom half. So that's one distinction. By birds, they both have malika, which is using the thumbnail of the kohen and breaking it through the back, not through the neck. But the difference between the chattas oil is whether you split the head completely. According to Rashi, the oil we split through the two simonim, which is the trachea and esophagus. Not necessarily you have to split the skin as well. According to the Rambam, you got to split them all completely. And you sever the head from the rest of the body. But by a chatos, we say lo yavdil. By a chatos, we still leave it. We only cut off one siman or even two, but we leave it still intact. So these are a couple of the differences. And now the Gemara is going to explain how do you know all of these dinim when it comes to an oilas chatos. So we're up to that Samach Hey and Aleph, in completion of the Mishnah, probably about 13 lines on the top of the page. I'm going to go through the pasuk and learn out each din from the pasuk. Talking about we learned. It says in the pasuk. The pasuk says v'hikrivoy. Just to tell you what the pasuk says, it says that the hikrivoy you should approach and bring it the kohen elam mizbeach. You bring this bird to the mizbeach, and then it says umol lakes roishay. Yeah, you shecht off its head, and then it says v'hiktir hamizbeach. You roast it on the mizbeach, and then it says v'nimtza dama. You squeeze out, you press out all the blood, which obviously is quite difficult. If you already roasted on mizbeach, what blood are you planning to spread out? You already it all evaporated. Al Kirzberg on the wall is back. So we are going to discuss that. And as well, even the beginning of the pasuk, we kriva kohen, you should bring it. The pasuk prior, it says that if the oila you're bringing from a bird, those you couldn't afford to bring an animal, bring him a bird, then it says v'hikriv you should bring for the doves or the pigeons, and then the turtle doves. And then it says v'hikriv kohen. You already told us v'hikriv. Why do you have to repeat again v'hikriv kohen? And why do you have to say kohen? Who else is it going to bring? So we're going to go through every word in the pasuk and glean something from it. So let's begin. Tanaban, we learned you should bring it. Matam, but why does it have to repeat this? We already said in the previous pasuk you should bring it to the Mveah. We should never. It says in the previous pasuk it says already in the previous pasuk that you should bring already from the doves or the pigeons. Is Yochel thought Hamisnadev Oif, if you donate a bird, Lo Yivchais Mishnei Preitin, you shouldn't give less than two. Now Teirim is plural, Bnei Yain is plural, so maybe you have to give two, just like a woman of your letters has to bring more than one bird. So we think same thing here. Tamaloimer, therefore it says Vihikrivoy in singular form that you only have to bring one bird, even though it's only a bird, only one. In Matam Hakoyin, why does it say Vikriva Hakoyin? What would we have thought otherwise? No, to establish that only a kohen can do this hakrava, bring it to the mizbech. Why would I think otherwise? It makes sense. When it comes to an animal, we're much more particular when it comes to an animal. It has to be slaughtered on the right side of the mizbech, on the north side. Remember, you're walking up, you're coming from the east side, the mizbech right in front of you, on the right side, which is tzaf and north, that's where you shecht it. So we're very particular where you shecht it. Maybe so too, we should be particular who shechts it, and we're not. We don't care if Yisrael shechts it. We don't care who shechts it. So surely, when it comes to a bird, when we don't have to shecht it on the right side, shecht it anywhere, so surely, even a Yisrael should be able to shecht. That's what we would have thought. Oma ben sayin shekavol tzafin has to be dafkin in the north. Lekavol koyin, a koyin doesn't do it. Oif a bird. So like kavol tzafin, we don't have. There's no special place for the bird to be, at least not on the north side. Surely we don't care whether a koyin did it or a koyin didn't do it. It says El Hakoyim. That's why it says El Hakoyim. Why? That's why he mentions the word koyin. So it actually doesn't say the word El, just says koyin. It said he kriva hakoyin. Not sure why the Gemara says El. So that's why it said that there should be a koyin. Koyin. Establish that it was a koyin that actually has to do the malika. Okay, then continue. Yochel, you have to use a knife. And Medina makes sense. By an animal, we are particular has to be a knife. So surely by a bird, where we are less particular, surely should be done with a knife. Mayim shchita shaloi kabbalah kohen. Doesn't have to be done by a kohen. Yet kabbalah keli has to use a knife. We had a machlekes before to show him whether a knife is actually called a klei sharis or not, but it's still a keli utensil. Malika shekabbalah kohen. When it comes to malika bird, where you establish a kohen has to do it. Ein adin shikol keli should use a knife. Therefore, it says in the pasuk kohen. Umolak. Now we're learning a new thing from the word kohen. It says in the pasuk kohen, and in the juxtaposition of the word umolak, that the kohen himself from himself. Not only the kohen is the one who does activity, but it's part of himself that he does the activity with his nail. Amar Kibbutz, he saw that the Shurish. Kibbutz disagree. He says we don't need kohen to tell me that a kohen has to shecht it. And why not? We must have a good reason. Animals are Yisrael can shecht, so surely a bird also a Yisrael should shecht. No, but we're a shechting, right? Adjoining the mizbeach. Yisrael are not there. The last 11 amos next to the mizbeach is kohenim. The 22 amos between the top of the steps of the mizbeach. The first 11 is Ezras Yisrael, and the next 11 is Ezras kohenim. So how can the Yisrael be standing there? So why would we even think Yisrael should be qualified to do the shchita? So why say hakohen? And then it says a malach. It tell you that it's part of the kohen that's being used to do the malika. So Ella matam kohen malika, but after kohen, the malika should be done with the finger of the kohen itself. Okay, then Yochel, I would have thought, then you can go ahead and do Malika, whichever region of the Mizbeach you want. Bein Maila, Bein Mata, I would have thought you would do it any region you want, whether it's the top part of the Mizbeach or whether it's the bottom of the Mizbeach. Therefore it says, Umolak vehiktir. It says there's nothing in between the Malika when you shecht the bird, and you're cutting the bird, and the Ketayah. The Ketayah was done on top of the Mizbeach, so therefore it must be that's so to the Malika. Ma haktore bereish mizbeach, just like the haktore is done on top of the mizbeach, is so too after is af Malika bereish mizbeach. Malika also be done on top of the mizbeach. Umolak, it says Molak. What exactly is the procedure of Molak? Memul oirev, it's from the back of the neck. How do you know? How do you know when it comes to a chatas? How do you know when it comes to an oilus you do from the back of the neck? Maybe it's from the neck itself, like any other animal. But dino, and it makes sense. Never come a molak, never lahalan a molak. It says the rear molak. It says later on by a chatas bird also a molak. Is ma lahalan memul oidev, just like over there, you do it from the back. By it's very clearly said memul or poi, you do it from the back. And he's avkan memul oidev here also. You should do it from the back. The Pasuk says you shouldn't separate them. In other words, you don't cut either both through both semanim, or you don't cut all the way through, including the skin. So let's say also here. So by an oil, we should, if you follow the chatas, then go to the next step. Therefore it says umolak v'hiktir. You should do the malika, and then you should go away roasting. And we say mahaktor horeish. Just like when it comes to the roasting, we'll soon see how we know that. You separate the two parts. You roast the head separately, v'haguf la'atzma, and you roast the body. La'atzma is at malika. So too, when it comes to malika, you have to sever it completely. Horeish la'atzma, v'haguf la'atzma. They separate completely the head from the rest of the body. And how do you know that? How do you know that when it comes to roasting on the Mizbeach, you sever the head from the body? I know you roast on the Mizbeach separately. And then it says, it says in the Pasuk, you should go ahead and you should be maktir it. And then it says, it says that you should split open with your hands. You split open the wings, you split open the body, but don't break it open completely, and you put it on the Mizbeach. And they were talking about where the wings are. We're talking about the body of the bird itself. It says it and not something else. So that's talking about the body. What I do with the other part where it says that you should be makir on the mizbeach. They're talking about haktoras of the head. So they're two separate places. And then the part says it says you should press out the blood, kule. All the remaining blood that's in the bird, you have to press out against the wall of the mizbeach. It doesn't say v'nimtza mid dame from its blood. It says dame, all of its blood. All of it has to be squeezed out. El kira mizbeach to the wall of the mizbeach, el kira kev, but not the wall of the ramp, not the wall of the heichal. Ve'ezazeh. We're saying here, what are we talking about? The kira elyon, which part of the wall? Okay, now we're talking about the squeezing out the blood. Which section of the wall? Above the red line or below the red line? the kira elyon, above the red line. Maybe it's below. If it didn't make sense. Mother behem, mother when it comes to the animal world, we learned before that by an animal the carbon chatas is above the line, a carbon oil is below the line. And the oil is below. So surely over here, when it comes to birds, where the oil is below, birds where the carbon chatas bird is down below, then surely it would make sense that the oiler bird by animals the oiler bird is below and the chatas is above. So here by animal by a bird where the chatas is below, surely the oiler should be below. That's what we would have thought. Surely it says umolak vehiktir. It says in the pasuk umolak vehiktir. Vinim tzedoma, you press out the blood. So it says umolak vehiktir into them should all be done in the same place. Now and more than that, because it says after roasting you squeeze out the blood. There's no blood left. So why does the Torah put it the order in the sequence of events, which is impossible? Do malika, roast the mizbeach, press out the blood. It's coming to tell you where you should go ahead and press out the blood. You know where? Right next to, right adjacent where you're about to roast. You reverse the order, but just telling you where you should do the mitzvah, because you would have thought in the logic you should do in the bottom half of the mizbeach, and he's telling you to do the top half. The chisal after you roast it, we press out the blood. What are you going to press out? Elohim will tell you, just like when you're roasting is on top of the mizbeach, by your oil, where you press on top of the mizbeach. Okay, so what exactly is the process when it comes to this bird? Another difference between the two birds is which side you go. By the oila sa'if, you go to the top of the ramp, you make a right turn, because we'll do it on the southeastern corner. And the reason we do it, so that is because it's right next to Makam Hadeshan, the place where you throw out the crop, you throw out the junky parts. So therefore we make it there. Only if it got very crowded, do we do it on the other side, still on the south side, but the other side of the ramp on the southwestern corner. When it comes to a chatas, we do it on the southwestern corner because it says it has to be done. It's the only place where we can say that it's the front of the mizbeach, the south, and at the same time it's the front of the heichel on the west side. Okay, so tell us, Ketzad, they went up the ramp, so he went up. I remember there's a big ramp, and then there were two ramps offshoots. One on the left side went down to the yesod, to the base. On the right side, it went to the seviv, to the perimeter. So what happens here is, okay, Tzad, how is this done? He went up the ramp. He went down on the perimeter, and he went to Lekeren Dreimis Mizrachis. He went to the southeastern corner. This is the Oilas Oif, and that's the ideal place to do it because it's near the Mokkah Madesh, the place where the ashes go. The first step he did was Moilik Ezrosh. He did the shchita with his thumbnail, and we learned yesterday how difficult it was. Mimul Arpa from the back. Mavdil, by an oil, you have to separate them. Either you separate it to simonim, or you actually go all the way through severed head. Then you press out the blood against the wall of the mizbeach. Now, remember that there's the perimeter, but the perimeter to the top of the mizbeach is 3 amos, and then you have the 4 kronos. But the mizbeach itself was 10 amos high, so the perimeter was not the midpoint. Could be include the height of the base as well. The perimeter was not the midpoint. So if the perimeter was not the midpoint was 1 amma below. And that's the chut hasikra, that line that goes around the middle, chut hasikra. So technically, you can go ahead and do the mitzvah hadam below the perimeter. You're standing on the perimeter somehow, that's the way we understand right now, and you stoop all the way down and you press it beneath your legs, which is pretty easy to topple over. The Gemara will explain in a minute. If you did it below your feet, I feel up to an amma, kasher, could still above the midpoint. They disagree. They say it's not enough that's above the line. It has to be the top of the mizbeach near the corners. My benaya, what exactly is their argument? The argument is everyone agrees that the malika and the haktorah have to be done. The malika and haktorah and the mitzvah they will have to be done next to each other. They will be done next to each other. The question is, did they only burn things on top of the mizbeach? What about on the surface of the mizbeach, or what about on the ramp, on the perimeter itself? If they wanted to make a fire, it's too busy up there, can they make a fire and burn? Because if they can make a fire on the perimeter, then doing the mitzvah hadam within an am of that is perfectly acceptable. But if you hold that the only places where you can roast is on top of the mizbeach, on the roof, then of course it doesn't work. So we say here, so what's the difference of Bai, but Robert, what they both say, arguing whether you can actually make a fire on the perimeter itself. If you can make a fire on the perimeter, then you could do the mitzvah hadam. You can go ahead and press the blood right next to it, because you can also do the tailor. You can fulfill the pasuk, molach, the hiktir, and then you do the mitzvah hadam, the pressing of the blood. But if you hold that the fires can only be on the roof of the mizbeach, then you cannot press the blood below the perimeter. It's too far away. Studying much further. Okay, then it says bolo the goof. And this, after you did the mitzvah dam, the next step was you took off the zefek, you took off the crop, and you took off the noitza, the feathers. We take literally the feathers, and then you take off the bnei mayim that was attached to it, the intestines that were attached to it. And I will say it'll be actually a different opinions, and the way Rashi learns the word noitza itself that we translated to mean feathers. Not everyone agrees that's what it means. Others will say it means the pupik or the gizzard. It's the gizzard. So let's just start. Tell them what I learned. The hayseed es murasa, you should remove the murasa, the crop. Bin noitzasa, take a little with his feathers. Zu zefek, so that's talking about the crop. Yochel, I would have thought yakti besatkin v'yitlena. I would have thought that you just take out the crop itself without any hide, with any of the skin with it, without any feathers, like you do a bird. You want to make sure it's clean. You pluck the bird, so you just want the crop itself. Where it has the undigested food, Talmud it says bin noitzasa, together with its feathers. So noitza lesa noitza ima. You take the crop together with the feathers, that's covering it. Abba Yosi ben Chon disagrees. He says the word noitza does not mean feathers. What does it mean? Noitla the noitel kukovnima. Noitza over here does not mean feathers. Noitza means actually the gizzard. Noitza means something mias, which is the gizzard, which has mias. And that's what you take with it. Rabbi Shmuel Tanan, the Shir Shmuel learns, bin noitzasa. He says bin noitzashalah. He says it means feathers. But what do you mean noitzasa? It says like to be very specific. It's feathers. Means koydra besakin. You don't rip it up by hand. You take a knife, kimina ruba, like a window. You cut exactly around the area with a crop. So you cut out the surface area as well. You take the feathers from there, but no larger area than that. Whether he's arguing on the Tanakh who says you take with the feathers, is the Tanakh saying without that particular, you can use your hand to pull it out, and he's saying no, it has to be very exact, so you don't want to have anything extra, or they're actually saying the same thing, is an argument amongst the Rishayim. Okay, says the Gemara. Okay, then the Mishnah says, Shisa, you break open the bird, and you don't go ahead and you don't separate it. You don't separate the bird by a carbon chatas. And then the Mishnah said, but if you did, it disqualifies it. By an oil, if you didn't, it disqualifies it. You know, this is mandatory. You have to make sure it doesn't get separated. Like Gemara was saying, not everyone agrees. So the Gemara, I don't know, first of all, I'll tell you, is by hand. It says by Shimshon Agibah. When he killed that lion and he ripped it apart, by Yishaseyu, he ripped it apart as Kishasa Hagdid. It's like he ripped open a goat. Was nothing to him. So we see that ripping by hands is Shisa. Okay, loy heisid as amurah. The Mishnah says if you did not remove the murah, it's still all right. And we learned that any activity that takes place after you did the mitzvah hadam is ratchila. But if you didn't do it, it's all right. Anyway, so our Mishnah said that if you were mavdil by the karmachatas, you severed the head completely, it is possible. And by an oila, where you're supposed to sever, if you didn't, it is possible. Says the Gemara, our Mishnah is like Rabbi Elazar but Rabbi Shimon. Our Mishnah definitely does not follow Rabbi Elazar but Rabbi Shimon. What's the story? The Tanya we learned, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, Shemaiti, I heard, Shemavdilin bechatasayif. You say that if you separated by a chatasayif, it's disqualified. I heard that you do. Not that you do, but if you did, it's all right, as Rashi explains. Not that you're supposed to trade a clothes and loyal. But it means if you did it, it's all right. It's not the end of the world. It's only a mitzvah. My benayim. What's going on here? So introduce another din, which is paramount over here, and that is, the Gemara will give three answers that are based on this understanding. But the principle is the same, is only the circumstances are different. The din is if you prepare the chatas ha'oif in the very same fashion like an oila sa'if, it is disqualified. There has to be one step that you're doing that is no good by oila sa'if, or is no good by chatz sa'if, and therefore it separates the two, and therefore what you're doing. So I don't care if you had in mind this is a chatz sa'if, but if you treated it like an oila sa'if. So, for example, you severed the head. That's what happens by an oila sa'if, not chatz sa'if. So what are we talking about? But there's another thing that you have to do, and the question is whether it's how salient is it, how integral is it that if you didn't do it, does it disqualify? So if there's something else to be done to the chatzas oif, which would disqualify it, let's say by an oila, and you did it, so you demonstrated that this is not an oila, this is a chatzas because I did it, or there's something that I shouldn't have done. Something you do by an oilan and you didn't do it by a chatas. I didn't do it, proves that it's a chatas and therefore it's kosher. As long, even though you severed the head, you just shouldn't have done, but if you did it, but then you did another step that demonstrably is not the step that you would use for a carbon oilas oif. Rather, a chatas oif, it's good enough. So we have three different opinions as to what exactly that step is. Let's go through. Opinion number one. What's the difference? What's the machlekes? The difference is mitzui chata sa'oif. This that we say there's remnants of blood after you press the initial neck. There's remnants. That's called mitzui hadam. Whether it's integral to the whole bird and that you have to squeeze it against the wall. Ika benai by carbon chata sa'oif. If you did not do the rest of the blood, no, but if there's a way of separating it, ika benai, that would be the difference. And it goes as follows. The Tanakama holds mitzui chatas oif ma'akiv. He holds that you have to be mematzah the dam afterwards. So if you went ahead and if you don't do that, the bird is not kosher. So therefore, if you went ahead and you did what do you call it? You separated the head and all that, and then you go ahead and you continue doing the mitzvah, which an oila bird you have to continue pressing. By a chatas bird you have to continue pressing. So in every respect, what you just did now was identical to the activities you do for an oila sa'if. It disqualifies the bird. It disqualifies the bird. However, that's Tanakama. So since you did mitzvah, you have to mitzvah. Looks like you treated this bird like an oiler rather than a chatas because you severed the head. But Rabbi Bashima says if he says it's not necessary to go ahead and do mitzvah adam. So you know what you do? If you severed the head, don't do mitzvah adam. Had it been an oiler bird, you would have. And now that you didn't, prove that this is not an oiler bird. You severed the head, okay, but that's enough. It's not sufficient to say it's like an oiler bird. And that's how you get around it. And that's why b'di'evet it's all right, because you did not press the blood. It's because you don't have to. If you don't have to, don't do it. Don't do it. So that's a nature that you can remedy the situation after you sever the head. The fact is you cut the head off. So I will say, since when I was cutting the head, I didn't do it to be like an oiler. I was just cutting flesh. Because if I did it like an oiler, I would have done mitzvah hadam. Page already asks, small little taste Kabin Maisa, he says, but the fact that there's a difference where you do it on the bech, above the line, below the line. And the chatas below the line, you did this above the line, so the chayri you can tell right away whether this is an oil or a chatas. So Taisa, that's not meaningful enough. That's not significant enough to say that this qualifies, that this negates the other carbon. Again, also it's like a chatchilu thing. So that's answer number one. Rava said, I agree in your principle. We cannot make it look like an oil, but I am going to say they're arguing about something else. Rava says, when it comes to an animal, there's two simonim that you have to shech. The animal does not die until you cut through the trachea and the esophagus, the windpipe and the food pipe. But if you cut through one of the pipes, another one, the animal still survives. So it's not a shchita. When it comes to bird, even if you cut one siman off, the bird's dead. So by an animal, because you need both simonim, and together they form the full shchita, you're not allowed to have shehiyah. You're not allowed to hang around and just pause, because then it seems like there's two separate activities, and you didn't kill the animal the second moment. You only did one siman. So therefore, shehiyah is possible. When it comes to a bird, as soon as you cut the first siman off, it's already no longer alive. Now the Torah wants malika, you should cut through two. So the question is she an issue here? Because the whole point of she is because it didn't die and you're pausing it, so like two different activities. But here it's dead anyway. So maybe she is not a problem, is not considered a disqualification. Or maybe even though that's doesn't matter regarding death, if you do malika, you have to have both semanim, then we treat it like an animal, you have to cut through both. And shia is a problem. And that's going to be the machlekes. Very simple. In the same thing, it goes as follows. They're arguing about Shia. There's a pause in the second simon by a bird. That's the Maki Kibaraya. Tanakama, the Tanakama holds Shia besimin sheni ba'oilas makiv. The Tanakama holds that Shia in the second simon by a oilas is not makiv. You don't have to have by an oilus also doesn't matter if you did shia or not. You didn't do shia. By a chatas oif, there's no choice. It's inevitable to shia because the way that we'll see the procedure later, when you cut the first simon, it's not just cutting the first simon and go right on to the second simon. You also have to cut most of the flesh around it. So inevitably, there's going to be a pause between the first simon and the second simon. But if the oil itself also does not require immediate cutting the second one, a pause is all right. So now if you sever the head, the chatas looks like it's treated just like an oila, puzzle. But if you hold that an oila, you have to cut both of them straight away, and she is a problem, no different than an animal, then when you pause by a chatas, because you have no choice, you have to cut the flesh around it, that therefore automatically makes a pause, then it's no longer like an oila, because an oila there's no pause, here there was a pause. So even though you sever the head, you're just cutting a piece of meat. It's not part of the malika. Says the Gemara, she lemakiv afagav the shia covered ma'ise oile bechatas. Even though you pause, since an oile also it doesn't matter. There's a pause, and what you did was you severed the head. It seemed like you treated this chatas bird like an oile puzzle. But Rabbi Hashem says ma'akev. Rabbi Hashem holds it is ma'akev. Now, what that when it comes to an oilus oif, you have to cut both of them together. The kivan to shia mechateh, and therefore. Since Shehia, he's saying here that Shehia is what do you call it? By an oila. Doesn't matter. It matters. By an oila, you have to. By oila, you have to. Shehia is mechat is basa ba'almu. It is only basa. In other words, you only cut basa. It's different than an oila. An oila, you have to cut both of them together. An oila, you have to cut through both of them together. And here. You don't have to cut both semanim together. So therefore, because by a chatas oif, there is a shia automatically. And by oilus oif, you cannot have a shia. Then even though you cut the head off, the chatas bird does not look like it did an oila. That's the answer number two. And keeping the shia, are you cutting? It's only cutting a piece of meat. And even though severing the head, it's just a piece of meat. It's not part of the mulika. Abaya gives a third answer for the same principle. He says, how important is it that the roi basa ma'akev? What happens by a bird? Can you go straight and cut both semanim, or do you actually have to cut most of the meat? And the same machlekes is so if you have to cut most of the meat and you have to have a shia, everyone holds shia is a problem. If you have to cut both meat, then you have to have a shia by chatas, just like you have to have a shia by oil. It's exactly like an oil, possible. But if you hold, you don't have to cut. The both meat. If one, you can cut both semanim. Then if you sever the head, just cut both semanim. It's different than an oila, so it's not a problem. And this is actually an argument in Abzeda. I'm sure Rabbi Yitzchak to argue the machlekes of Rav and Abai. What the principle is, chadam shehiyah b'sim sheni b'ozov ma'akev, that they're arguing about that there is a din that shehiyah by an oila is vital. And it's a problem, and Ikam and I, that's a machlekes, and Chada says, no, roi basa ma'akev, they're arguing about whether you have to cut through most of the flesh between the first simon and the second simon, which automatically makes a shia. Because the be'inan the roi basa, but the Gemara said, because the be'inan the roi basa, see, everyone agrees you have to cut most of the flesh by a chatas bird, by oif, no, by chatas. Why? Why do you have to cut one simon? Can't you go straight to the next simon? Why do you have to cut all the flesh around? The Gemara, yes, because the Tani will not braisa. How do you do this? Oif. You cut through the spine and mafrekas of the neck below your basas. When you did the neck, you didn't touch the semanim yet. You just did the neck. You break the vertebrae, and you have to break it with your finger, which is pretty hard. Then, and according to some, that's the difficulty of malika. Then you cut one sign. Most of it. That first sign that you cut, you have to cut through most of the flesh. And by a oila, the oila bird shnayim, you cut both semanim. The majority of both semanim, machlekes the name. And nothing to do with flesh. Amru Kamerabim, they told over Rabim the three answers. Amr, he said they're all wrong. Hadn't they heard Hadam Rav Shimon Yakum? Didn't they hear what Rav Shimon Yakum said? Meshum Rabbi Elazar ben Pdas, Meshum Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua. At Omer Hoyer Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon Shemaiti. I heard The chatas ha'oif shemavdil. And I heard that by a chatas ha'oif, you're allowed to separate the severed head. The Torah says lo yavdil. Umay lo yavdil. When the Torah says lo yavdil, means ain tzadok. Sometimes when it says don't, doesn't mean don't. It doesn't mean you don't have to. It's a big chiddush. The Torah says don't, and you're saying doesn't mean don't have to. You don't have to cut the head. On oil, you have to cut the head. Here, you don't have to. Only following that logic. Gabi boy, it says by boy. See, you dug a hole and you didn't cover it. According to you, means you don't have to cover it. You don't have to cover it. I mean, you can go through the whole Torah now. It's going to change everything around. So, what are you comparing? Over there, the Torah is trying to make liability. And it says, if you don't do this, there's liability. Obviously, the chasana means that you better cover it. You have to pay. Therefore, it's his responsibility to cover it. It says in Pasuk here that you should be makriv and which means that you put it on the beach and you separate it. And the Torah is mechalik, and chatas ha'oif lo oilas. The Torah makes a difference between chatas ha'oif and oilas, because it says he krivoy. You only bring it. Only so this pasuk is only limited to an oila, and we're not talking about the chatas bird. And therefore, since over here you separate, on chatzah bird, obviously you don't separate. So why does the Torah have to spell out leyavdo by chatzah bird? It's automatic. Lomali, Shema will tell you that not that you don't separate, you don't have to. A tzorich lahavdos. No, but you need a limit to say that when it says don't, it doesn't mean don't, but you don't have to. Let's finish the Gemara. Mitzvah damaguv. We said that if you're supposed to press out the head and the body, but the most important part is the body. It says in Pasuk that it means even though if you sprayed out, it's pressed out the blood from the body, even though you didn't press it from the head, it's good enough. I would have thought maybe the other way around as well. Maybe if you press out the blood from the head and not the body is good enough. It says in the Pasuk who. Right? It says in the pasuk that you should go ahead. It says in the pasuk that it's an oila, and because it says who means follow the rules. My tumble. What are you talking about? How do you learn from there that it means the body rather than the head? Who goes on one of them is that you have to do the press out the blood. I know which one. I'm going to make it makes more sense. The reiv damim beguf, the majority of blood is found in the goof. So if you have to press up one of them for sure, it would be the body. Hadna lo kachim. Continue tomorrow in Mitzvah Hashem. Okay, have a good day.